She was dumped by her fiancé and married a homeless old man who was actually a millionaire in disguise. Olivia Johnson never imagined that the most important day of her life would turn into the worst nightmare anyone could experience. At 32, she was about to marry the man she loved, but life had other plans for her. The wedding morning began with a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't just the usual bride's jitters, but something different, a tightness she tried to ignore while getting ready at the salon. Her maid of honor Ashley noticed her silence, but attributed it all to the emotion of the big day. The dress was perfect, her hair flawless, the makeup delicate. Everything seemed to be in order for the 3 o'clock ceremony at the downtown church in Savannah, the small town in New York City where Olivia had been born and raised. When she arrived at the church, the guests were already seated. 200 people were waiting to witness her union with Brandon Parker, the successful businessman who had won her heart 3 years earlier. Olivia took a deep breath and entered through the side door, waiting in the small attached hall until the wedding march began. But minutes passed and nothing happened. "I think Brandon is stuck in traffic," said Ashley, trying to calm her friend. 15 minutes turned into 30. 30 became 45. The murmur of the guests began to grow. Olivia felt her heart beating faster and faster, her hands sweating inside the lace gloves she had chosen so carefully. She tried to call Brandon, but his phone was turned off. She called the best man, the groom's close friends, but no one answered. More than an hour had passed when the priest finally entered the hall, his face serious behind his thin framed glasses. He excused himself and spoke quietly with Ashley, who instantly turned pale. The maid of honor looked at her phone, read something and covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "What is it?" asked Olivia, feeling her legs begin to tremble. Ashley couldn't answer right away. Her hands were shaking so much she almost dropped the phone. She swallowed hard before showing the screen to Olivia. It was a message from a mutual friend, with a photo attached. The image showed Brandon inside a car, kissing another woman. The caption said they had been seen leaving town that morning, with suitcases in the trunk. The world seemed to collapse at that moment. Olivia read the message 3 times, as if she needed to be sure she wasn't dreaming. The priest gently touched her shoulder and asked what she wanted to do. She didn't know how to answer. How could she? There were 200 people waiting on the other side of that door, people who had taken their Saturday afternoon to celebrate a love that, apparently, had never really existed. "I need to say something to them," murmured Olivia, her voice coming out weak and trembling. "No, you don't have to do anything," Ashley tried to argue. "Let me handle this." But Olivia was already opening the door. She entered the church, walking slowly down the center aisle. The guests fell silent when they saw her, some smiling, thinking the ceremony would finally begin, others with expressions of confusion and pity. When she reached the altar, Olivia turned to face all those familiar faces. Her parents in the front row, her mother with tears in her eyes, not understanding what was happening. Her aunts, uncles, cousins, childhood friends, co-workers, all waiting. The priest stepped up to the altar and, with a voice full of compassion, announced that the ceremony would not take place. He gave no details, only apologized for the inconvenience and suggested everyone go home. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by a few muffled sighs and the sound of chairs scraping as people began to stand up. Olivia remained standing there, watching the downtown church empty out. Some guests had the decency to leave quietly, but others couldn't hold back their comments. She heard the whispers, the speculations, the gossip being formed right there, in God's house. Her mother, Nancy, rushed up to the altar, hugging her daughter tightly while asking what had happened. Olivia couldn't speak. She just handed her phone to her mother to see the message. The scream Nancy let out echoed through the church walls. Her father, Robert, came running too, and when he learned the truth, he turned red with anger. He wanted to go out immediately to look for Brandon, but Olivia grabbed his arm, begging him not to do anything. What would be the point? The man she loved had left with another woman, on the morning of the wedding, leaving her there like a fool in front of everyone. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The following days were a haze of pain and humiliation. Olivia locked herself in the small apartment she shared with a friend, refusing to go out or answer the phone. Social media exploded with the news. Someone had filmed the moment the priest announced the cancellation, and the video already had thousands of views. The comments were cruel, speculating about what she had done wrong to be abandoned like that. But the worst discovery was yet to come. 1 week after the wedding that never happened, Olivia received a call from the bank. The joint account she and Brandon had opened to save money for their honeymoon, and the down payment on the apartment they planned to buy was empty. Brandon had withdrawn everything 2 days before the wedding. It was 4 years of her savings, all the money she had saved with so much sacrifice, working as a Spanish teacher at a private school and giving private lessons on weekends. Olivia collapsed on the living room sofa, holding the phone so tightly her fingers turned white. $43,000. It was all she had in the world, and now she had nothing. The apartment rent was due in 10 days, and she had no way to pay it. The friend she lived with, Jennifer, was also unemployed and depended on Olivia's share to keep the place. "I don't know what to do," Olivia confessed to Jennifer that night, both sitting on the old living room sofa. "I tried to get a loan, but my credit is bad because of a card I forgot to pay last year. My parents don't have money to lend me. They can barely pay their own bills." Jennifer suggested she ask her uncles for help, but Olivia knew it would be useless. The whole family was in a tough spot. The city's economy hadn't been doing well for years. Many businesses had closed their doors and everyone was struggling. Besides, how could she ask to borrow money when everyone looked at her with pity and distrust, as if she were somehow to blame for what happened? The temporary solution came from an unexpected place. A distant cousin, who worked as a manager at a diner by the highway connecting Savannah to other cities, called saying there was an opening for a server. The salary was low, barely enough to pay a simple rent, but it was better than nothing. Olivia accepted right away, swallowing her pride at having to work waiting tables when she had a college degree and years of experience as a teacher. On her first day of work, she barely recognized her own reflection in the diner's bathroom mirror. The bright orange uniform with the establishment's name embroidered on the chest, the apron stained with grease even after washing, the plastic badge hanging around her neck. That wasn't the life she had planned. 3 weeks ago, she was about to get married and start a new life. Now she was there, taking orders from truckers and travelers, cleaning dirty tables and washing dishes when the kitchen helper was absent. The diner was located at a busy spot on the highway, always full of people passing through. The smell of grease permeated her clothes and hair, and at the end of her shift, Olivia felt every muscle in her body ache. But the worst part wasn't the physical work. It was having to endure the recognizing glances from some customers who lived in the city and knew who she was. Once, a group of women who had been at the wedding came in for coffee, and Olivia had to serve them while they whispered and laughed, clearly talking about her. It was on one of those exhausting days that she noticed the man for the first time. He was sitting on one of the benches in the park across from the diner, the only green area along that stretch of highway. He was an elderly man, looking to be over 60, with long white hair and an equally white beard that reached the middle of his chest. His clothes were simple and worn, a brown jacket with visible patches on the elbows, thick fabric pants faded by time and sun. Beside him, an old cloth bag seemed to contain all his belongings. Olivia watched him for a few minutes while cleaning tables near the window. The man did nothing but sit there, watching the traffic on the road. He didn't ask for money, didn't bother anyone. He just existed in that space as if he were part of the landscape. When she went back inside the diner, she asked her cousin about him. "Oh, that's Mr. Walter," replied the cousin, drying a glass with a dish towel. "He showed up around here about 6 months ago. Sleeps on that same bench, sometimes comes in to ask for a glass of water. The owner doesn't like it much, says it drives customers away, but he's polite, doesn't make a mess." In the late afternoon, when the rush died down, the man entered the diner. His steps were slow but firm, and when he reached the counter, he took off an old cap from his head in a gesture of courtesy. Up close, Olivia could see his eyes. They were a light blue, almost transparent, and there was a depth in them that surprised her. They weren't the eyes of someone defeated by life, but of someone who had chosen to live that way. "Good afternoon, miss," he said, his voice hoarse but gentle. "Could I please have a glass of water?" Olivia nodded and went to get the water. When she returned, he thanked her with a smile that revealed yellowed but still all-in-place teeth. She watched as he drank slowly, savoring each sip, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. When he finished, he returned the glass and thanked her again before leaving. That simple interaction stayed in Olivia's mind for the rest of the day. There was something about that man that sparked her curiosity. Maybe it was the dignified way he carried himself, despite the appearance of someone who had nothing. Or maybe it was just the fact that, unlike everyone else in town, he didn't look at her with pity or judgment. To him, she was just the diner waitress, nothing more. In the following days, Mr. Walter always returned at the same time to ask for water. Olivia started setting aside the leftover food that would be thrown out at the end of the day, putting it in a clean container and offering it to him when no one was looking. The cousin had warned that the diner owner didn't like employees giving food to homeless people, but Olivia didn't care. It seemed wrong to throw away so much food when there was someone right there in need. The man accepted the food with gratitude, but never asked for it. It was always Olivia who offered, and gradually they began to talk. Small exchanges of words at first, just greetings and comments about the weather. But as the days passed, the conversations grew longer. Mr. Walter had a way of speaking that caught attention, using simple words but loaded with meaning, as if every phrase had been carefully thought out before being spoken. One afternoon, almost 3 weeks after Olivia had started working at the diner, she was having a particularly difficult day. A customer had been rude to her, complaining that the sandwich was cold even though it had just come off the grill. Her cousin had deducted the cost of the food from her salary, saying she needed to cover the loss. Olivia knew it wasn't fair, but she couldn't argue. She needed that job. When Mr. Walter came in to ask for water, she must have let her frustration show on her face, because he asked if everything was okay. Olivia tried to smile and say yes, but her voice failed and her eyes began to sting. She quickly turned away, pretending she needed to get something from the kitchen, and locked herself in the small storage room at the back of the diner. There, surrounded by boxes of supplies and the strong smell of cleaning products, she let the tears fall. It wasn't just because of the rude customer or the money deducted, it was because of everything. For being left at the altar, for losing all her savings, for being there waiting tables when she should have been starting a new life. It was for the humiliation of having to face the people in town, for the nasty comments on social media that she couldn't stop reading, even though she knew they only hurt her more. It was for feeling like she had failed at everything, that her life had completely fallen apart, and she didn't know how to rebuild it. The storage room door opened slowly. Olivia quickly wiped her face, expecting to see her cousin coming to complain that she was wasting time. But it was Mr. Walter who was there, standing in the doorway, holding his old hat in his hands. "Sorry to bother you, miss," he said softly, "but I noticed you're suffering, and I couldn't leave without saying that, whatever is weighing on your heart, it will pass. Everything passes with time." Olivia didn't know what to say. How could this man who lived on a park bench talk about overcoming difficulties? But there was something in the way he spoke, a quiet conviction that made her sit on one of the boxes and, without even really realizing it, start to tell him everything. About the cancelled wedding, about the stolen money, about the humiliation and the despair. Mr. Walter listened in silence, just nodding from time to time. When she finished, he sighed deeply and sat on another box, despite the visible effort it took for his old joints. "I'm going to tell you something, miss," he began, looking at his own hands. "We think the world has ended when we lose the things we had, when people let us down. But do you know what I've learned in all these years of life? That the biggest losses are sometimes the best gifts life can give us." Olivia looked at him confused, and he continued, "That man who left you at the altar, he stole your money but gave you back your future. Because if he did that before getting married, imagine what he would have done later. Imagine living years beside someone fake, slowly discovering that the person you love doesn't really exist. It hurts now, but you were lucky, miss. You escaped." The words echoed in Olivia's mind. She had never thought of it that way. She had been so focused on the pain and humiliation that she couldn't see any positive side. But Mr. Walter was right. If Brandon was capable of doing that, of emptying their account and running off with another woman, what kind of husband would he have been? And about the work here, Mr. Walter continued, there's nothing wrong with earning an honest living, no matter what the job is. I've been many things in life, worked in many places, met many people. And I can tell you one thing. It's better to work serving tables with dignity than to live lying and deceiving others. They talked for a few more minutes before her cousin shouted from the kitchen, looking for Olivia. Mr. Walter stood up, put his cap on his head, and said before leaving, "Remember, miss, the storm always passes, and when it does, you'll be stronger than you were before." Those words stayed with Olivia. In the following days, every time she felt sadness tightening her chest or anger taking over, she remembered what the old man had said. She started talking more with him and discovered that behind that simple appearance was a man with fascinating stories. He never spoke much about himself, always changed the subject when she asked about his past, but between the lines of their conversations, she could tell that he was no ordinary man. The way he talked about business, about properties and investments, always casually but revealing deep knowledge. The way he knew about art, literature, history. Once he commented on a painting exhibition that had happened in New York City decades ago, describing the works with details that only someone who had been present could know. Another time, he mentioned in passing a trip he had taken to the northeast of the country, talking about the places like someone who knew them well, not like a tourist. But Olivia didn't press. If Mr. Walter wanted to keep secrets about his past, it was his right. She was just grateful for those conversations, which were the only moments of the day when she felt truly heard and understood. A month had passed since Olivia started working at the diner when the eviction finally came. Jennifer called in the morning crying, saying that the court officer had appeared at the apartment. They had 1 week to leave. Olivia felt the floor disappear under her feet. Where would she go? With the diner's salary, she could barely pay for food and transportation. There was no way to rent another place, even the simplest possible. Her father offered for her to come back to live at their house. But Olivia knew that wasn't a real option. Her parents' house was tiny. 2 bedrooms barely divided the space, with a living room and kitchen that were practically the same thing. Her 2 younger brothers still lived there, sharing one of the bedrooms while her parents occupied the other. There was no physical space for one more person, and Olivia didn't want to be another burden for the family that was already struggling. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now continuing. That afternoon, Olivia was in the diner's storage room, organizing boxes of supplies and trying not to think about the desperation of the situation when Mr. Walter appeared at the door. She hadn't noticed, but she was crying again. Tears streamed silently as she stacked cans of tomato sauce, her movements automatic while her mind spun in circles trying to find a solution that didn't exist. "Miss Olivia," he said, using her name for the first time. She had mentioned it in some past conversation, but didn't think he would remember. "I accidentally overheard your conversation with your cousin earlier, about the eviction." Olivia wiped her face with the back of her hand, embarrassed to be seen like that again. She tried to say that everything was fine, that she would find a solution, but the words came out weak and unconvincing. Mr. Walter entered the storage room, closing the door behind him. He fell silent for a moment, as if gathering courage to say something important. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm but gentle. "I have a proposal to make, and before you answer, I want you to listen to everything carefully, because I know it will sound strange at first." Olivia looked at him confused, and he continued, "I want you to marry me." For a moment, Olivia thought she had misheard, or that the old man had gone mad. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Mr. Walter raised his hand, asking her to let him explain. "I'm not talking about a real marriage, not in the way you're thinking. I'm talking about an arrangement. You need a place to live and money to start over. I need company. I'm an old man, Miss Olivia, and loneliness is a heavy burden to carry." "But you have nothing," said Olivia, finally finding her voice. "How can you help me if you live on a park bench?" A sad smile crossed Mr. Walter's wrinkled face. "I have more than meets the eye. I won't go into details now, but I can assure you that you would have a place to live. A house. Simple but better than the streets. And I could help with your debts too." Olivia shook her head, still processing what she was hearing. This was absurd. It was crazy. Marry a homeless man? She had already been humiliated enough. If the people in town found out, she would never be able to hold her head up again. "I can't accept this," she said, her voice coming out louder than she intended. "I'm sorry, Mr. Walter, but it's madness. I don't know you. And even if I did, I won't marry for convenience, not after everything I've been through." "I understand," he replied, not seeming offended. "And I don't expect an answer now. But think about what I said. The offer stands." He left the storage room, leaving Olivia alone with her confused thoughts. The proposal was absurd, but a small part of her, the desperate part that didn't know what to do, began to consider it. Would it be so bad? He had said it wasn't a real marriage, just an arrangement. And if he really had a house, it would be temporary, just until she could save up enough money to rent her own place. But no, she couldn't. She had already been left at the altar once, already been made a fool of. Now she was going to marry a homeless man. What would people think? What would her mother say? No, it was impossible. There had to be another solution. Except there wasn't. Olivia spent the next 3 days looking for alternatives. She tried to ask for loans everywhere she knew, but always got a no for an answer. She looked for rooms to rent, but even the cheapest ones were beyond her reach. She thought about going to another city, starting over from scratch somewhere where no one knew her, but she didn't even have money for the bus ticket. On the 4th day, she woke up to a call from an unknown number. It was a collection agency, calling about a credit card she had forgotten existed. The debt had grown with interest and fees, and now they were threatening legal action if she didn't pay within 48 hours. Another $3,000 that she didn't have. It was at that moment, sitting on the bed of the apartment that would soon no longer be hers, with the phone in her hand and the feeling that she was drowning, that Olivia realized she had no choice. Pride didn't pay the bills. Shame didn't put food on the table. And being on the street was worse than any humiliation she might suffer. That afternoon, when Mr. Walter came into the diner to ask for water, Olivia pulled him into the storage room before anyone could see. "That proposal," she said, the words tumbling out quickly before she lost her nerve. "Is it still on the table?" Mr. Walter studied her for a long moment, those clear blue eyes seeming to see right into her soul. "It is," he replied simply. "Then I accept, but with conditions. I need to know you really have a house, and I need to know that you won't expect anything from me besides company. I don't want you to touch me. I don't want you to think you bought a real wife." "You have my word," said Mr. Walter, placing his hand over his heart in a solemn gesture. "I won't touch you unless you want me to. And yes, I have a house. You'll see." They worked out the details in the following days. The wedding would take place at the courthouse, simple and quick. No party, no guests except for the required witnesses. Olivia didn't tell any family or friends. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing the disappointment in her mother's eyes or hearing the relatives' comments. Jennifer found out when Olivia asked her to be a witness, and she was shocked, but ended up agreeing when she saw her friend was determined. The ceremony happened on a rainy Tuesday in June. The courthouse was an old building downtown, with peeling walls and a musty smell that clung to everything. The clerk who assisted them barely hid the judgment in her eyes when she saw the groom with his worn-out clothes and beggar-like appearance. Jennifer stood by Olivia's side, holding her hand tightly, while a courthouse employee served as the second witness. When it was time to sign the papers, Olivia's hand shook so much she could barely write her own name. What was she doing? It was crazy, but it was already too late to turn back. She signed, Mr. Walter signed, the witnesses signed, and that was it. In less than 15 minutes, she was married again. Or rather, for the first time for real, since the other marriage had never happened. When they left the courthouse, the rain had stopped, leaving only that fine drizzle typical of winter in the countryside. Mr. Walter picked up the old bag and nodded for her to follow him. Olivia said goodbye to Jennifer, who hugged her tightly and whispered in her ear to be careful, before following her new husband through the wet streets of the city. They walked for almost 40 minutes, crossing neighborhoods farther and farther from downtown. Olivia began to get nervous. Where was he taking her? The farther they walked, the emptier the streets became, until they finally reached an area she recognized as being on the outskirts of town, where there were some old farms and abandoned houses. Mr. Walter stopped in front of a rusty iron gate, held shut by chains. He took a key from inside the bag and opened the padlock, pushing the gate that groaned loudly on its rusty hinges. On the other side, a dirty stone path covered in weeds led to a house that made Olivia's heart sink. The building was old, with exposed brick walls stained by moisture and time. Some windows were broken, patched with boards nailed on haphazardly. The roof had several missing shingles, and the front door hung crooked on one hinge. This wasn't a house. It was a ruin. "This is it," said Mr. Walter, already stepping through the gate. Olivia followed him with slow steps, feeling the weight of the decision she had made. She had agreed to marry a beggar, expecting at least to have a roof over her head. But this was worse than she had imagined. How could anyone live there? There were visible holes in the walls. The yard was a jungle of tall weeds and accumulated trash. When Mr. Walter opened the front door, the smell of mold and abandonment hit her hard. Inside, the house was empty. There was no furniture, just some cardboard boxes stacked in a corner. The cement floor was dirty and cracked in several places. In what should have been the living room, there was an old faucet dripping constantly, forming a puddle on the floor. Mr. Walter crossed the room and entered another space, which seemed to have been a bedroom. There was an old mattress on the floor, covered with worn but apparently clean sheets. "I know it's not much," he said, turning to Olivia, who had remained standing in the doorway. "But at least it's not the street. And there's water. There's a wood stove in the back that works. You can live here until things get better." Olivia felt tears burning her eyes again. What had she done? Had she traded a small but decent apartment for this? Had she married a stranger to live in a house that should have been demolished years ago? She turned around, ready to run out, to annul that ridiculous marriage and find another solution, any solution. But where would she go? She had no money, no apartment anymore. She had nothing. And Mr. Walter had been honest. He said he had a house, and he did. He didn't promise luxury, he didn't promise comfort. And she had accepted, knowing he lived like a beggar. What did she expect to find? With a sigh of defeat, Olivia entered the house and let the small suitcase she had brought drop to the floor. This would be her home now, at least temporarily. She just needed to endure until she could save enough to get out of there. In the following days, Olivia established a routine. She woke up early, got ready as best she could in the only functioning bathroom in the house, where the old electric shower occasionally gave shocks, and went to work at the diner. She returned at night, exhausted, and always found Mr. Walter there, sitting on the floor of the empty living room, sometimes with an old book in his hands, other times just staring into space. They barely talked now. Olivia was resentful, feeling deceived, even though she knew it was unfair to blame the old man. He had fulfilled his part of the agreement. She had a place to live, but the anger and frustration needed a target, and he was the only available one. Mr. Walter seemed to understand. He didn't try to force conversations, didn't impose himself. He just existed there, a silent ghost in an abandoned house. Sometimes when Olivia came home from work, she found food prepared on the wood stove, rice, beans, some simple greens. She ate without thanking him, but inside she felt a pang of guilt for being so ungrateful. The weeks passed, and Olivia's financial situation remained tight. The diner salary barely covered her basic expenses, and she still needed to pay off the credit card debt she had been threatened with a lawsuit over. She started doing overtime whenever she could, taking the shifts nobody wanted, working late into the night, and returning alone to that gloomy house on the outskirts of the city. It was on one of those nights that something changed. Olivia had worked a double shift and returned home almost at midnight. She was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. When she entered through the door, she tripped on one of the cracks in the floor and fell to her knees, letting out a cry of pain and frustration. Mr. Walter appeared from the bedroom in seconds, his eyes wide with concern. He helped her up with a surprising gentleness for a man his age, and when she tried to take another step, her leg gave way. She had sprained her ankle in the fall. The old man carried her to the bedroom, an impressive feat considering his age, and laid her carefully on the mattress. He left and returned minutes later with a wet cloth, which he wrapped around Olivia's swollen ankle. "You can't go on like this," he said softly, while adjusting the cloth. "Working so much, sleeping so little. Your body can't take it." "I have no choice," Olivia replied, her voice bitter. "I have debts to pay, and I need to save money to get out of here." Mr. Walter was silent for a moment, then sighed. "Do you want to leave that badly?" The question took Olivia by surprise. She looked at the old man, really looked, for the first time in weeks. She saw the deep wrinkles around his eyes, the age spots on his hands that still held the wet cloth against her ankle. She saw the poorly disguised sadness in his expression, and something inside her broke. "I don't know what I want," she admitted, closing her eyes. "I just know I'm tired of everything." That night, for the first time since the marriage, they really talked. Not about superficial things, but about pain, about loss, about how hard it was to keep going when it seemed like the whole world was against you. Mr. Walter told a bit more about himself, revealing that he had been married before, that he had had a different life before choosing to live as he did. "Why did you choose to live like this?" asked Olivia. "On the streets alone. Because I discovered that all the things I thought mattered didn't really matter," he replied. "Money, possessions, status. In the end, when you lose the people you love, none of it means anything." There was pain in his voice, an old but still present pain. Olivia wanted to ask more, wanted to know what had happened, but realized it wasn't the time. Instead, she just whispered, "Thank you for helping me, for everything." In the following days, with her injured ankle, Olivia had to stay home. Her cousin called angrily, saying that if she missed one more day she would be fired, but Mr. Walter took the phone from her hands and spoke to the cousin in a way Olivia had never seen. His voice was firm, authoritative, with none of the submission a homeless person should have when speaking to someone. "The young lady is injured and won't work until she's recovered. If you want to fire her for that, go ahead. But know that there are labor laws that protect employees in health situations." The cousin was so surprised that she just stammered an apology and hung up. Olivia looked at Mr. Walter with wide eyes. "What was that?" He just shrugged and went back to the kitchen where he was preparing soup. But that small display of authority planted a seed of doubt in Olivia's mind. Who was that man really? How did a homeless person talk about labor laws with such authority? How did he know so much about so many things? During the week she was resting, she began to pay more attention. She noticed small details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way Mr. Walter carried himself, always with upright posture despite his age. The way he held cutlery when they ate, with the elegance of someone used to formal dinners. The books he sometimes read weren't popular novels, but classic works of philosophy and history. One day, while Mr. Walter had gone out to buy some things in the city, Olivia decided to explore the house more carefully. She limped through the empty rooms, observing the construction details. The house was old and abandoned, but it had been beautiful once. The ceilings were high, with decorative moldings still visible under layers of dust. The windows, though broken, were large and let in plenty of light. There was a backyard garden that, with care, could be beautiful. It was in what seemed to have been an office that she found something interesting. There was an old desk leaning against the wall, and when Olivia tried to move it, a stuck drawer finally gave way. Inside were papers yellowed with time. She picked up a few and began to read. They were property deeds. The house she was living in was registered under the name Walter Randolph Campbell Hamilton. But it wasn't just that house. There were other addresses listed. 3 houses in the upscale area of Savannah, an apartment in Virginia Beach, a plot of land in Charleston, and more documents, so many that she couldn't process everything at once. Olivia's heart raced. Were those documents real? She studied the stamps, the signatures. Everything seemed legitimate. But how? How could a beggar who slept on park benches have properties scattered throughout the region? She was still holding the papers when she heard the front door open. Quickly, she tried to put everything back in the drawer, but she was so nervous that some papers fell to the floor. When Mr. Walter entered the office, she was standing, leaning against the desk, the documents scattered at her feet. The silence that followed was heavy. Mr. Walter looked at the papers, then at Olivia, and she saw something in his eyes change. It wasn't anger, but a sad resignation, as if he knew that moment would eventually come. "I can explain," he said, but Olivia interrupted him. "Who are you really?" she asked, her voice trembling. "These houses, these lands, are they yours?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Mr. Walter sighed deeply and sat on the floor, as if his legs could no longer hold him up. He remained silent for a long moment, his hands trembling slightly as he chose his words. "Yes, they're mine," he finally admitted. "These and others. I didn't lie when I said I had more than it seemed, Olivia, but I didn't tell the whole truth either." "Why?" she asked, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. "Why live like a beggar if you have all this?" Walter looked up at her, and what Olivia saw there was such deep pain that she felt a tightness in her chest. "Because all this means nothing when you have no one," he said in a broken voice. "I built an empire, Olivia. I started from scratch, worked every day of my life, invested in real estate when it was still cheap, made the money grow. I had a construction company that was one of the largest in the region. I had everything. A huge house, imported cars, a full bank account." He stopped, swallowing hard before continuing. "And I had a family. A wonderful wife, Eleanor. She was the light of my life. We had 2 children, Michael and Emily. They were everything to me. Everything." The word came out loaded with so much love and so much pain that Olivia felt tears in her own eyes without even knowing why. "What happened to them?" she asked softly. Michael was 23, finishing engineering school. Emily was 20, studying architecture. One day, almost 10 years ago, they took the car to visit Eleanor, who was taking care of her mother in another city. I had stayed behind to sort out some problems at the company. They were supposed to come back the next day. Walter stopped speaking, his eyes fixed on some distant point, lost in painful memories. "They never came back. There was an accident on the highway. A truck driver lost control of the vehicle. They didn't stand a chance. Eleanor, Michael, Emily, I lost all 3 at once." Olivia brought her hand to her mouth, feeling her own tears flow. The pain in Walter's voice was palpable, even after all this time. I'm so sorry," she whispered. After that, nothing made sense anymore. Walter continued. "I tried to keep working, I tried to keep up appearances, but everything was empty. The huge house I built for my family became a mausoleum of silence. Every room held a memory. Every object was a reminder of what I'd lost. I couldn't take it. Gradually, I started to distance myself from everything. I sold the company, transferred the properties to a trusted manager who keeps everything in order. And I took to the streets." "But why?" asked Olivia. "Why live like that, Olivia?" "Because I wanted to test if there was still kindness in the world," Walter replied. "I wanted to see if people would help someone who apparently had nothing to offer in return. And I discovered interesting things. I discovered there are good people, like you, who offer food even when going against orders. And I discovered there are many bad people who pass by me as if I were invisible, or worse, like trash." He looked at Olivia with those light blue eyes that she now realized carried the weight of a lifetime of experiences. "And then I met you. I saw a young woman suffering, going through the worst moment of her life, and still having compassion for an old beggar. You gave me food, treated me with respect, talked to me as if I were a real person. Not because you had anything to gain, but because that's who you are." "So you married me out of pity?" asked Olivia, feeling anger beginning to rise. "No," Walter replied firmly. "I married you because I saw in those green eyes the same loneliness I felt, because I realized we were both lost, each in our own way, and I thought maybe we could help each other. I offered you what I had, which was more than it appeared, and you offered me companionship in the years I have left. There was no pity in that, there was understanding. Olivia fell silent, processing everything. Part of her was still angry about being deceived about Walter's true situation, but another part, a larger part, began to understand. He hadn't exactly lied, he just hadn't told everything, and perhaps he had his reasons for that. "These houses in the documents," she said, pointing to the papers on the floor. "Are they all yours?" "Yes," Walter confirmed. "But they're rented out or closed up. I couldn't live in places full of life when my life no longer had any. I preferred this house, which belonged to Eleanor's family. This is where I met her when we were young. She grew up here. I let the house fall into ruins because after she was gone, I couldn't come in here without feeling pain. But I also couldn't sell it. It was all I had left of her." The pieces began to fall into place in Olivia's mind. That's why he had brought her there. It wasn't just any abandoned house, it was a place full of meaning for him. And by bringing her there, by allowing her to live in that sacred space of memories, he was doing something deeply personal. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked. "Because I wanted to be sure you were with me for who I am, not for what I have," Walter replied. "I've lived surrounded by people who were only interested in my money. When Eleanor and the children passed away, those same friends disappeared. I discovered that relationships based on money are as fragile as wet paper." He stood up with difficulty, his old joints complaining from the effort. "But now you know the truth, and if you want to leave, I understand. I can give you enough money to start over, rent a place, pay your debts. You don't have to stay married to me out of obligation." The offer took Olivia by surprise. She could leave. She could take the money, solve her problems, return to a normal life. But then she thought about what that normal life would be. She'd go back to teaching Spanish, maybe find someone new someday. Maybe not. She'd live alone, carrying the scars of the humiliation from her cancelled wedding. And Walter? Would he return to his bench in the park, watching life pass by, hoping the few years he had left would end quickly so he could reunite with the family he lost? For some reason she didn't fully understand herself. The thought of leaving him there, alone in that house full of ghosts from the past, broke her heart. "I'm not leaving," she said, and the words surprised her as much as they surprised Walter. "Not yet. I want to stay. For now." "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice filled with barely contained emotion. "I am," Olivia replied, and realized it was true. "But on one condition. No more secrets. If we're going to live together, even if it's just temporary, I need you to be honest with me." Walter nodded, a small smile appearing on his lips for the first time in a long while. "No more secrets," he promised. In the following days, the dynamic between them changed completely. Walter began to share more about his past, about the company he built from scratch, about the challenges he faced over the years. Olivia discovered that he had been one of the most respected businessmen in the region in his prime, known for treating his employees well and for investing in social projects. He also started to show that despite having left that world behind, he still kept in touch with some people. One of them was his lawyer, Attorney William, a man in his early 50s who managed Walter's properties and ensured the rents were paid and everything was legally in order. It was Attorney William who showed up at the diner a week after the revelation. Olivia was working when a well-dressed man in a suit and tie entered and asked for her. She recognized him as the lawyer Walter had mentioned and immediately grew tense. Why was he there? "Mrs. Hamilton," said the lawyer, extending his hand. It took Olivia a second to realize he was referring to her by her married name. "My name is William Anderson. I'm your husband's attorney. He asked me to give this to you." He handed over a thick envelope. Olivia took it with trembling hands and opened it. Inside were legal documents and what looked like a job offer. She read quickly, her eyes widening as she processed the information. It was an offer to work as a manager at an upscale restaurant about to open in Savannah, with a salary 3 times higher than what she made at the diner. "I don't understand," she said, looking at the lawyer. "Why?" "Your husband has a stake in this restaurant," explained Attorney William. "He believes you have the qualifications needed for the position. He said you are dedicated, punctual, and know how to handle people. Those are exactly the qualities we need." Olivia didn't know what to say. It was an incredible opportunity, but at the same time it felt strange. It was as if she were accepting charity, and her pride resisted that. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course," replied the lawyer, handing her his card. "Get in touch when you decide." That night, when she returned home, Olivia confronted Walter about the proposal. "Why did you do this without talking to me first?" "Because I knew you would refuse if I asked," he answered honestly. "You're proud, Olivia. It's one of the things I admire about you. But sometimes pride keeps us from accepting help we really need." "I don't want your help," she said, but the words came out without conviction. "It's not help," corrected Walter. "It's a real opportunity. I do have a stake in this restaurant, yes, but I'm not giving you the job out of charity. I'm giving it to you because I believe you're capable, and if you accept, you'll have to prove it. The restaurant owner has no idea you're my wife. To him, you're just a recommended candidate. The rest is up to you." Olivia thought about it. When put that way, it made more sense. It wasn't charity, it was a chance, and God knew she needed a chance. "Okay," she said finally, "I'll accept. But if I fail, it's because I'm not good enough, not because you didn't help me." "You won't fail," Walter said with conviction. "I know you won't." Olivia started at the restaurant 2 weeks later. It was an elegant place, with dark wood tables and soft lighting, the kind of establishment that attracted a different clientele from the roadside diner. She was nervous on the first day, but found that the work, although more sophisticated, wasn't all that different from what she had been doing. It was still about serving people, making sure they were satisfied, and solving problems as they arose. The restaurant owner, Mr. Thompson, was a demanding but fair man. He made it clear from the start that he expected a lot from her, but he was also willing to teach. Olivia gave it her all, arriving early and leaving late, learning about wines, sophisticated dishes, and how to deal with demanding customers. At home, her relationship with Walter continued to evolve. He began making small repairs around the house. Nothing too elaborate, but enough to make the place more livable. He fixed the broken windows, replaced some roof tiles, and painted the living room walls. Olivia started helping too, and gradually the house went from being a ruin to something that could be called a home. 3 months had passed since the wedding. Olivia was adapting to her job at the restaurant and surprisingly enjoying it. She had a knack for managing people, she discovered, and customers responded well to her attentive yet professional manner of service. Mr. Thompson had even commented that she was doing an excellent job and that there might be a raise in the future. But the past never stays buried for long. It was on a September afternoon when Olivia was supervising the lunch service at the restaurant that Brandon appeared. She saw him as soon as he entered, and it felt like a punch to the gut. He looked different, thinner with deep dark circles, his beard unkempt. His clothes were expensive but wrinkled, as if he had slept in them. He scanned the restaurant until his eyes met hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. Olivia felt her heart beating so loudly, she was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. Then Brandon started walking toward her, and she knew she had to act. She couldn't make a scene there, in front of the customers and her boss. She met him halfway, keeping her voice low and professional. "What are you doing here, Brandon?" "I needed to see you," he said, his voice hoarse. "Olivia, I made a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life." "You think?" she replied, sarcasm dripping from her words. "Leaving your fiancé at the altar, stealing her money and running off with another woman does count as a mistake." I know. He ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration she knew well. "It was crazy. I don't know what came over me. That woman, Brittany, she convinced me we were in love, that we should run away together. But after we left, after the money ran out, she left me. Said I was a weakling, that I was worthless." Olivia didn't feel a twinge of pity. She should have been happy with the poetic justice of the situation, but she actually felt empty. The man in front of her meant nothing anymore. "And why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I want to apologize," said Brandon, his eyes filling with tears. "And I want you to come back to me. We can start over, we can forget everything that happened and—" "Come back?" Olivia interrupted him, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "Do you really think that, after everything you did, I would want to come back to you?" "I heard you married that old beggar," said Brandon, and for the first time there was a different glint in his eyes, something that looked like greed. "But I also heard he's not exactly a beggar. They say he has properties, money. They're saying you married a millionaire in disguise." And there it was. He hadn't come back out of remorse. He hadn't come back because he loved her. He had come back because he heard she had married someone rich. Olivia felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger at his audacity, relief at finally seeing who Brandon really was. "Get out of here," she said, her voice icy. "Leave now, before I call security." "Olivia, please." He tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. "I said get out. You mean nothing to me. I don't even feel hate anymore. You're just a mistake I was lucky enough not to make." Brandon still tried to argue, but Olivia was already turning away, signaling to one of the restaurant's security guards that there was a problem. The guard approached and Brandon, realizing he wouldn't get anywhere there, finally left, but not before throwing one last look of anger and frustration at Olivia. She tried to keep working, but she was shaking. She excused herself from Mr. Thompson and went to the restroom, where she locked herself in a stall and let the tears fall. They weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of relief, of realizing she had finally gotten over it, that Brandon no longer had any power over her. When she got home that night, she told Walter everything. He listened in silence, that calm, wise expression on his wrinkled face. When she finished, he simply said, "You did the right thing. That man showed you who he really is. Believe him." "I do," said Olivia. "And you know what? I'm thankful he left me at that altar, because if it hadn't happened, I never would have met you. I never would have discovered that sometimes the worst things that happen to us are actually gifts in disguise." Walter smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his whole face. "You're turning into a wise old woman, Miss Olivia." "Must be the company," she joked, and they both laughed. That night marked a turning point in their relationship. For the first time since the wedding, Olivia realized she no longer saw Walter just as a temporary solution to her problems. She genuinely enjoyed his company. The deep conversations they had while eating dinner on the living room floor, the stories he told about his younger years, the wisdom he shared about life. And Walter, in turn, began to seem less ghostly, less stuck in the past. The house, which was being renovated little by little, started to have a different energy. It was no longer a mausoleum of painful memories, but a space for new beginnings. At work, Olivia continued to excel. Mr. Thompson was so impressed with her performance that he decided to expand the business, opening a second location of the restaurant in a neighboring town. And he wanted Olivia to be the general manager of both establishments, with a significant pay raise and a share in the profits. It was an incredible opportunity, but it also meant much more responsibility and many more hours of work. Olivia was torn. On one hand, it was the chance to really establish herself professionally, to prove to herself that she was capable. On the other, it meant less time at home, less time with Walter. When she talked to him about it, she expected him to encourage her to accept without hesitation. But Walter surprised her. "The decision is yours, Olivia," he said. "But I'll tell you something I learned too late in life. Money you can always earn more of, a career you can always build. But time is the only thing that doesn't come back. And when you lose the people you love, you find that all the professional success in the world isn't worth a single extra moment with them." The words struck a deep chord in Olivia. She thought about Walter losing his family, about how the entire empire he built meant nothing without them. She thought about her own life, about how she had been so focused on achieving financial and professional stability that she almost lost sight of what really mattered. "But I don't want you to think you need to refuse because of me," Walter continued. "If this is what you want, accept it. I'll be here when you get back, no matter the time." Olivia ended up accepting the offer, but with one condition. She negotiated with Mr. Thompson to have at least 3 days off per week, alternating between the two restaurants. It was less than he wanted, but he agreed, recognizing that she had enough value to justify the flexibility. With the new salary, Olivia finally managed to pay all her debts. The feeling of relief when she made the last payment was indescribable. For the first time in months, she could breathe without feeling the weight of financial worry crushing her chest. With the extra money, she wanted to help with the house renovations. Walter hesitated at first, saying he didn't need it, that he had enough resources. But Olivia insisted. This was their house now, and she wanted to contribute to turning it into something special. Together, they planned the renovations. Nothing extravagant, but careful and well thought out. They hired a local handyman to help with the heavier work, but they did a lot with their own hands. Walter turned out to be surprisingly skilled at carpentry, building shelves and fixing doors. Olivia painted walls, choosing cheerful colors that brought life to the dark rooms. The garden was transformed. They hired someone to clear the overgrown weeds, and then Olivia planted flowers, the same ones she remembered seeing at her grandmother's house when she was a child. Walter built a small wooden deck in the back, where they could sit to have coffee in the morning and watch the sunset in the afternoon. But the most significant transformation happened in the old room that had been Walter's office. He was reluctant to touch it. It was where Eleanor had grown up, where his family had lived. But one afternoon, while they were working in the living room, he looked at the room and said, "You know, I think Eleanor would like to see this place full of life again. She always said a house needed to be lived in, not preserved like a museum." Together they transformed the office. They cleaned, painted, and put up new curtains. Olivia suggested they put up Walter's family photos there, which he kept stored in a box. He hesitated but agreed. When the photos were hung on the wall, Olivia could finally see who Eleanor, Michael, and Emily had been. A beautiful woman with a warm smile, two young people with the whole world ahead of them. The pain on Walter's face as he looked at the photos was visible, but there was also something else. A quiet acceptance, as if he could finally honor their memories without being consumed by them. The months passed, and Olivia's life settled into a comfortable routine. She worked hard on the days she was at the restaurants, but on her days off, she enjoyed the simplicity of being at home with Walter. They talked for hours, cooked together, sometimes just sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but content with the other's presence. It was on one of those quiet afternoons, almost a year after the marriage, that Walter brought up the subject they had both carefully avoided until then. "Olivia," he said, looking at his wrinkled hands, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Of course," she replied, setting aside the book she was reading. "Do you still see me as a temporary solution? Are you still planning to leave as soon as you have enough money saved?" The question took Olivia by surprise. She realized it had been weeks, maybe months, since she had thought about that. At some point, without her noticing, that house had stopped being a temporary refuge and had become her real home. "No," she answered honestly. "I think I stopped thinking about that a while ago. I like being here. I like being with you." Walter's eyes filled with tears, but he was smiling. "I like having you here too," he said in an emotional voice. "You brought life to this house again, to my life again. I was just existing, waiting for the days to pass until I could be reunited with my family. But you reminded me that there are still reasons to live, to laugh, to have hope." Olivia felt her own heart tighten. At some point during that year, that old man with white hair and beard had become more than just a paper husband. He had become her friend, her confidant, her family. "Walter," she said softly, "can I ask you a question now?" "Anything." "Do you still sleep on the floor in that room?" It was true that despite all the renovations, they still kept separate rooms. Walter in the old room with the worn mattress on the floor, Olivia in another room where she had set up a simple bedroom for herself. "Yes," he answered. "Why?" "Because that's ridiculous," said Olivia. "We're married, we're sharing a life, but we still sleep in separate rooms like strangers. I know it made sense at first, but now—" She stopped, suddenly shy. What exactly was she suggesting? Walter looked at her with those penetrating eyes for a long moment. "Olivia, when we married, I promised I wouldn't touch you unless you wanted. That promise still stands. I'll never pressure you for anything you're not ready for." "I know," she said, "and I'm grateful for that. But I think I'm ready. Ready for this to be a real marriage, if you want that too, of course. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of the wind in the garden trees. Then Walter extended his hand, old and wrinkled but steady. Olivia took it, feeling the rough skin against her own. "I would like that very much," he said softly. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter. They renovated the master bedroom together, choosing a new bed, curtains, everything. They made that space something that belonged to both of them, not to the ghosts of the past. And gradually, what had started as a marriage of convenience, as a practical transaction between two desperate people, turned into something real. Love wasn't born overnight, but grew gradually, in the small attentions, in the deep conversations, in caring for each other. Olivia never imagined she could fall in love with a man more than 30 years older than her. But she discovered that age meant nothing when it came to true connection. Walter understood her in a way that Brandon never did. He respected her, valued her opinions, encouraged her to grow, and she, in turn, brought joy back into his life. Walter began to smile more, to laugh more. The shadows that had lived behind his eyes for so many years began to fade. He started going out more too, not fully returning to the high society he had abandoned, but beginning to reconnect with some people, to attend small events. When they completed 2 years of marriage, they had a small celebration. Nothing big or showy, just a special dinner they cooked together in the renovated kitchen of their home. Walter had invited attorney William, the lawyer, who had become a friend over the years. Olivia invited Jennifer, who had been surprised but happy to see how radiant her friend looked. During dinner, attorney William mentioned he had a proposal to make. A major hotel chain was interested in buying one of Walter's properties in downtown Savannah, a large lot that had been idle for years. The offer was generous, very generous. Walter looked at Olivia before answering. "What do you think?" he asked. The question surprised not only Olivia, but also attorney William. Walter was asking for her opinion on financial decisions. He was treating her like a real partner, not just a young wife who didn't understand business. Olivia thought carefully before answering. "I think it depends on what you want to do with the money," she said. "If it's just to leave sitting in the bank, maybe it's not worth selling something that has sentimental value or future potential. But if you have some project, something you want to do, then maybe it makes sense." Walter smiled, clearly satisfied with the answer. "Actually, I have a project in mind," he said. "I was thinking of opening a community center, a place where vulnerable people can learn trades, have access to courses, maybe even have a place to stay temporarily if they need to." He looked at Olivia. "I spent months living on the streets. I saw a lot of good people who just needed a chance, someone to believe in them. And you, Olivia, showed me what it means to give someone a chance without judgment. I want to be able to do that for other people too." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. The idea was beautiful, and so typical of the man Walter had revealed himself to be, someone who had lost everything, who had enough money to live in luxury, but chose to use his resources to help others. "I think it's a wonderful idea," she said, "and I want to help. Maybe the center could have a training restaurant where people can learn to work in the food industry. I can use my experience from the restaurants to create a training program." The excitement was palpable as they discussed possibilities. Attorney William took notes. Jennifer offered suggestions. What started as a simple dinner turned into a planning session that went late into the night. In the following months, the project took shape. The sale of the land was completed, and with the money they bought an old building that had been a school, perfect for conversion into a community center. The renovations began, and this time it wasn't just Olivia and Walter working, but a whole team of architects, engineers, and workers. Olivia became deeply involved in the project, especially in the training restaurant part. She developed a training curriculum, sought partners to provide ingredients at reduced prices, even got some renowned chefs from the area to volunteer to give occasional classes. Walter, in turn, handled the administrative and financial part, but also made a point of being present, of getting to know the people who would be helped by the project. He didn't want it to be just another cold and impersonal institution. He wanted it to be a place where people felt seen, respected, valued. The center's opening was scheduled for 10 months later. It was a simple but moving event, with the presence of local authorities, the press, and most importantly, the first people who would be benefited by the program. During the inauguration speech, Walter talked about his own journey, about how he had lost everything that mattered and had chosen to live on the streets, about how he had met a young teacher who had been left at the altar and was going through the worst time of her life, about how that encounter had changed both of them. "This center isn't just about giving chances," he said, his voice firm despite the emotion. "It's about recognizing that all of us at some point need help, that there's no shame in having fallen, only in not trying to get back up, and that sometimes the people who seem to have the least are the ones who have the most to teach about dignity, kindness, and perseverance." He looked at Olivia, who was by his side. "My wife taught me that. She could have ignored me when I was just an old beggar asking for water. But she saw me as a human being, treated me with respect, and for that I am eternally grateful." The applause was long and warm. Olivia had tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. She looked around the hall full of people, at the new and shiny facilities of the center, at the hopeful faces of the people who would have a new chance thanks to that project. Who would have thought that 2 years ago she was at the worst moment of her life, left at the altar without money, without hope, and now there she was, married to an incredible man she truly loved, managing 2 successful restaurants, helping to create something that would make a difference in many people's lives. In the following months, the center began operating at full capacity. The training restaurant was a particular success. Olivia and her team trained the first class of 15 people, teaching everything from basic kitchen techniques to customer service and time management. At the end of the 3-month course, everyone found employment, some in Olivia's restaurants, others in partner establishments in the region. Seeing those people, many with stories similar to hers or Walter's, managing to rebuild their lives was the most rewarding experience Olivia had ever had. Each program graduation was a special event, with Walter and Olivia present to hand out certificates and celebrate the achievements. At home, life remained simple but happy. The house that had been a ruin was now a cozy home, full of plants in the garden that Olivia cared for with affection, of books that Walter collected on shelves he built himself, of small details that told their story. One afternoon, almost 3 years after the wedding, Olivia was in the garden watering the flowers when Walter came out of the house with a strange expression on his face. She dropped the hose and went to him, worried. "What is it? Did something happen?" "I got a call," he said, "from the hospital in Virginia Beach. They've been trying to locate me for days, but I hadn't given them my current address, so it took them a while." Olivia's heart raced. Hospital was never good news. "What is it about?" "It's about Michael," said Walter, and his voice broke as he said his son's name. "My son. They said he's alive." Olivia felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She must have heard wrong. It couldn't be. "Alive? You said he had... that the accident..." "I thought he did," said Walter, tears now flowing freely. "The car was destroyed. They told me there were no survivors. I identified the bodies, Olivia. I buried them." He sat on one of the garden benches, his legs no longer supporting him. "But the hospital said there's a person there who was admitted 3 years ago, a victim of the same accident. He was in a coma and had no identification. He woke up 6 months ago and has been in recovery since then. Recently, in therapy, he started recovering some memories and said his family name. Campbell Hamilton, said his father's name was Walter." Olivia knelt in front of him, holding his hands that trembled violently. "Walter, could this really be Michael, after all this time?" "I don't know," he replied. "I don't know, but I need to go there. I need to see." "Then let's go," Olivia said immediately. "Let's go now. I'm coming with you." The trip to Virginia Beach was a haze of hope and fear. Walter was so tense he could barely speak. Olivia drove, her own mind spinning with possibilities. What if it really was Michael? How was it possible? But what if it wasn't? What if it was just someone taking advantage of the situation? When they arrived at the hospital, they were taken to a room on the 3rd floor. The nurse warned them that the patient was still in recovery, had suffered serious injuries and memory loss, and that memories were returning gradually. Walter stopped at the door of the room, his hand on the doorknob, unable to open it. Olivia touched his arm gently. "I'm here with you," she said, "no matter what we find on the other side of this door." He took a deep breath and opened it. The man in the hospital bed looked fragile, thinner than he should be, with visible scars on his arms and face. But when he looked up and saw Walter standing in the doorway, his eyes widened. "Dad," he said, his voice weak and disbelieving. Walter let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He crossed the room in quick strides and hugged the man in the bed, careful with the wires and medical equipment, but strong enough to convey years of pain and longing. "Michael," he kept saying. "My son. My boy." Olivia stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face as she watched the reunion. The nurse beside her explained quietly that it had been a miracle. Michael had been thrown from the car on impact and landed in a dense vegetation area beside the highway. The first responders hadn't found him. He was only discovered hours later by a local resident. He was taken to the nearest hospital in critical condition and without identification. He fell into a coma immediately. When he finally woke up 6 months ago, he didn't remember anything, the nurse continued. His memory came back gradually, first small fragments, then bigger things. It was only 2 weeks ago that he remembered his full name and his father's name. Olivia entered the room slowly, not wanting to interrupt the moment. Walter was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding his son's hand, both crying. "Dad, where were you?" asked Michael, his voice choked up. "I woke up and asked about you, but no one knew who you were. I tried to look for you, but I couldn't remember the full last name. I couldn't remember anything properly." "I thought you were gone, son," said Walter. "I identified you. There was a body. They told me it was you. How was I to know a mistake had been made?" The conversation continued, filling in gaps, explaining the inexplicable. Apparently, there had been a terrible mix-up in identifying the bodies. In the chaos of the accident, with multiple vehicles involved, one body had been mistakenly identified as Michael's. Walter, devastated by the loss and not thinking clearly, had accepted it without question. "And Mom?" asked Michael. "Emily." The change in Walter's face said it all. Michael began to cry again, understanding without a word being spoken. "They're gone, son," Walter said softly. "Your mother and your sister didn't survive, only you did. By some miracle, only you survived." The pain was palpable in the room. Michael cried for the mother and sister he wouldn't see again, for the time lost in a coma, for everything. Walter held him, offering what comfort he could while dealing with his own turbulent emotions. The incredible relief of having his son back, the renewed pain of losing his wife and daughter, the guilt for having given up everything when Michael was there, needing him. It was Michael who finally noticed Olivia, still standing near the door. "Who is she?" he asked, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Walter looked at Olivia, and there was so much love in his eyes that she felt her heart tighten. "This is Olivia," he said. "My wife?" Michael blinked, confused. "You got married again?" "It's a long story, son," said Walter. "But yes, and she saved my life in a way you'll understand when I tell you everything." In the days that followed, they shared their stories with each other. Walter talked about how he had fallen into depression after the accident, how he had abandoned everything to live on the streets, how he had met Olivia. Olivia told him about being left at the altar, about agreeing to marry Walter out of desperation, about how that marriage of convenience had turned into real love. Michael, in turn, talked about the fragments of memories he had, about the long process of physical and mental recovery. The doctors explained that he still had a long road ahead, but the prognosis was positive. With time and physical therapy, he would regain most of his functions. 3 weeks later, Michael was discharged from the hospital. Olivia and Walter took him home, to the house that had been Eleanor's, which was now renovated and full of life. Michael's reaction upon seeing the place was moving. He remembered being there as a child, visiting his grandmother with his mother. "It's so different," he said, walking slowly through the rooms, "but at the same time I can feel her presence here. Mom's." Adjusting to life with Michael was both a challenge and a blessing. The house, which had been a quiet refuge for two, now had to accommodate 3. But more than the physical space, it was the emotional dynamic that needed to adjust. Michael was dealing with the loss of his mother and sister, something he had only truly processed after waking from the coma. He was trying to recover years of memories, rebuild his identity. Olivia worried about being an intruder, about occupying a space that wasn't hers in that family, but Michael surprised her with his acceptance. "Thank you," he said one night as the three of them had dinner together, "for taking care of my dad when he needed it, for not giving up on him." "He took care of me first," Olivia replied honestly. "We take care of each other." Over time, Michael started getting involved with the community center. He had studied engineering, and when he felt strong enough, he offered to teach classes on basic construction and home maintenance. It was therapeutic for him, discovering he could help other people despite his own struggles. Seeing Walter with his son was one of the most beautiful things Olivia had ever witnessed. The man who had been so lost in grief, who had abandoned everything because he thought he had nothing left to live for, now had a renewed purpose. Not only did he have Michael back, but he had Olivia, he had the center, he had a life full of meaning. 5 years after the marriage, they had a real celebration. Not at the courthouse on a rainy morning, but in the small neighborhood church, with friends, with the people they trained at the center, with attorney William and Jennifer, with Michael by their side. It was the renewal of the vows they had made out of necessity, but now they made them for love. Olivia looked beautiful in a simple yet elegant dress, her blonde hair falling in waves over her shoulders. Walter had his white hair and beard neatly trimmed, wearing a suit he hadn't worn in years, but which still fit him perfectly. When they exchanged vows, they weren't the standard courthouse words, but promises they had written for each other. "Walter," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the tears, "you found me at the worst moment of my life and offered me hope when I had none. You taught me that family isn't just about blood, but about choice, about being present. I choose you today, as I would choose you every day for the rest of my life." "Olivia," Walter replied, his own voice trembling with emotion, "you brought me back to life when I was already giving up. You showed me that there was still love in the world, still kindness, still reasons to wake up every day. You are the best choice I ever made, even without knowing at the time that it was a choice I was making." When they kissed, it wasn't just a ceremonial gesture, but the celebration of everything they had built together. The applause filled the small church, and for the first time since being left at the altar years ago, Olivia felt she was finally where she was supposed to be. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story, and where you're watching us from. Could you picture the transformation of these characters? What would you have done in Olivia's place? Leave your opinion in the comments with sincere words. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories. Thank you so much for your company.